What's up? I'm back. It's been a while, and you know me. Sometimes when I only make these videos when I'm inspired. And I was watching a Joe Rogan program. I said that I'm an MMA guy, so I like to watch Joe Rogan, even though he barely talks about MMA, honestly. And he had Neil Tyson DeGrasse on, and it was a pretty good interview. But there was one thing that Mr. Tyson said that I found interesting when they were talking about the ancient Egyptians. And basically, how they were saying, he was basically saying how he doesn't understand why people think the Egyptians had more knowledge than we do now. And I thought it's a very interesting concept because I could see a lot of scientists saying that. And to be fair to the scientists, I wouldn't necessarily say the Egyptians had more knowledge on everything. Obviously didn't. But I would say they had more knowledge of certain key elements. And I think if you look at it as Egypt itself, that's where you fall in the trap. So today, for instance, we have many people today who try to recreate Egyptian spirituality. And I think if you get caught up in the mask of Egypt, then I think it would fail, because if you get caught up in the mask of Egypt, I don't necessarily say Egypt itself was the one that had. Yes, of course, there's some things they had better. I mean, they could build pyramids. We would have problems building pyramids. Of course, certain things they did better for sure. And that's the Egyptians themselves. But I think in terms of when you look at it as a science, the nationality that the science is in is only the mask. So it's almost like saying, is Freemasonry British or is Freemasonry above Britain? Is Rosicrucianism French or is Rosicrucianism above France? Both Freemasonry and Rosicrucianism would not want to, I guess, pin their destiny on the country of origin, because they know that countries come and go, just like empires come and go. So they probably would want to be above that. It's the same thing. You think the Egyptians didn't have their version of Freemasonry and Rosicrucianism? Of course. So I don't want to look at, this video is not for, because I do think there's a little bit too much Egyptian worship or Kemetic worship, right, going along these days. I don't want to make another video based on that. So instead of me saying, was he right about the Egyptians, let's change Egyptians and say ancients. And the reason why I think it's important to say ancients is because this is going to lead to the point of this video. The point of this video is to ask the question, what would the world be like if the ancients never fell? And that's an interesting question. Because the first thing that somebody would say is, what's the ancients? At least I would think they would say, what's the ancients? And it's interesting because, so we would say Egypt, we would say Sumeria, we would say ancient China, we would say ancient India. And then we can even say further than that. We can say maybe the ancients was also people who, in the times of myth, before modern history took place. So for me, when people talk about Atlantis and Lemuria, I don't look at it as much. People get caught up in the names, and I think this is what happens with all these empires. People get caught up in the names, but not the structure of the science itself. And when I mean by the science itself, the knowledge of the science is above any empire. It's above any nationality. Yes, you have some nationalities who decode the empire. And some nationalities who decode that secret information. But when they decode the secret information, what also happens is it loses a little bit of its validity, because they then take it from their cultural lenses. And once they take that pure abstract information that exists in the mental plane and fuse it with their cultural lenses, it changes the information, oftentimes not for the better. So astrology would become astronomy if you're lucky, or religion if you're unlucky. Alchemy will become chemistry if you're unlucky, physics if you're lucky. And that ends up being a big problem, because then when even take concepts that certain religions would have, like Christians and Muslims are Christianity, Islam, and Judaism is the dominant three religions in the world. And I think they'll be more dominant if they weren't affected by the cultural lenses of the people who control those three religions prospectively. And what often happens is, if you introduce the concept of the ancients and you really start to research, you realize a lot of knowledge has been lost. But look at it from this angle. Even in Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, they talk about the fall of man. And the esoteric versions of like Gnosticism and to some extent Hermeticism does talk about the fall of man as well. And, I've been doing a lot of videos on ATRs, African traditional religions. And in some of the older, like a lot of times when people talk about African religions, they usually talk about the more public versions, the versions that for whatever reason, let's say the doggone spirituality, a European goes to Mali and talks to certain people and then he misinterprets what they said, and then everyone knows about the doggone tribe and the Nomos, right? Or you might have some religions like Voodoo and Yoruba who are famous because they had a large population of citizens who became slaves and they were transported to this part of the world. And when they transported this part of the world, their religions have become famous. But oftentimes when I talk about the oral traditions, the ATRs, I try to take from sources older than those. Or even if it's not older, sometimes some of the sources are not as mainstream. So when I talk about the Bushmen of South Africa, the Baka people, the Bakara people, or what some people mistranslate as pygmy people in Central Africa, or the Negritos in the Philippines and certain parts of Southeast Asia, you talk about traditions that's very old. And even in the Sangoma tradition, where the Sangoma tradition seems to be a fusion between that South African indigenous Bushman science, the Baka science, the Pygmies, and the Bantu peoples that came out of Cameroon that made it to Southern Africa. Even in Sangoma traditions, they speak about 23 races that existed before man. And I think this is important. Not for alien talk, because I think that's the problem is. The biggest problem of the world is that everything that we do is disconnected. So either you're spiritual or you're scientific. Either you're into deep thinking and you actually do research, or you're into conspiracies. So when I talk about this, it's not for aliens. I'm talking about races of earthlings. I don't really get into the alien stuff. And it's interesting because in the Sangoma tradition, when you have these 23 races, all not equal, there's 4 races that are at the top that you could consider almost like unfallen man, right? Like what we perceive as unfallen man. And in 19, that is in some extent fallen, and they regain their stride. Humans was interesting because when people got into this Atlantis Lemurian stuff, regardless of the names, it was more about we were functioning more like those 4 races that never fell. We fell, but unlike the other 19 that regained their stripes, we never regained it as humans. So we fell, we tumbled, and now we're Homo sapien, right? So now we're falling and we don't even know we fell. So we're functioning on a much lower level than we're supposed to. So when that happens, you often need science to regain your stride. So Neil Tyson DeGrasse, right? Oh, Neil deGrasse Tyson, I should say. My God. Neil deGrasse Tyson basically said, we have instruments now. Like we have things that the ancients didn't have. And we have more knowledge than they do. And when you're coming from his point of view, you're correct. Because when you come from his point of view, you're looking at it as the fallen Homo sapien that we see today. But the thing is once you understand, once you do a lot more research and you're a lot more open-minded, because to be honest, even when you say science itself, Newton, who was basically the creator of science as we know it, he would tell you that he studied more alchemy than he studied the traditional sciences that we see. Albert Einstein got inspiration from Indian Hindu texts. So the 2 biggest figures in science basically admit that they were heavily influenced by spirituality. You want to say the occult? You could say the occult. So this is not even something that's controversial. This is fact. You could research it. So then it opens up to say, well, since we fell, right? So when what we call the ancients was human beings who never fell. And that's why I rather say ancients than say Egyptians. Because the Egyptians, or by the time we got to Egypt, Sumeria, ancient India, ancient China, we were more like the 19 instead of the 4. The 19 are species that fell, regained their stride. The 4 never fell. So it's a significant difference. So when you say Egypt, Sumeria, traceable, and these are all traceable. You could go to Egypt, see the pyramids. You go to Iraq and see the ziggurats. Those are people that, at that point, we will function more like the 19, which we would still be in a better situation than we are now, because eventually what ends up happening is Egypt, Sumer, all fell. And the cultures that came after it, I mean, they're not, I mean, you could consider them ancients if you're talking about comparing them to 400 years old America, but they're not ancients compared to the cultures that came before them. But when I say ancients, so that's why I'd rather use a blanket term ancients than just say, than attach it to a Pacific empire. So when you begin to understand that, then you see, okay, let's say the ancients never fell. Where will we be today? And this is not fact. This is just basically speculation in terms of, because we, at certain points we don't know. You could become, if let's say Atlantis didn't get destroyed, give it any date, whatever date you want to say, and it got destroyed 2,000 years later, it's still destroyed. But we're actually giving it in terms, when I make this calculation, I'm talking about the trajectory of the knowledge that they were dealing with when they fell. And you can even kind of come to that conclusion because it's easier to come to that conclusion than people think. Because when you look at alchemy, theurgy, a lot of the occult sciences, those are remnants of the ancient science. So when the alchemist turned lead into gold, or if you want to get into the internal meaning of that, transforming a lead personality or unawakened person to an enlightened person, going from a regular person to a Buddha, right? You can actually then calculate like a Buddha. What would happen if the Asian continent listened to Buddha's teachings fully and lived exactly how he said? It's almost like saying, what would happen if Buddha was president? It's the same mindset. What would the world be like? Well, I could tell you, right now we currently have about 118 elements on the periodic table. We probably would have between, and I'm saying ancients, I'm going past before Egyptians. We probably would have between 300 to 400 elements on the periodic table. So imagine how different the world would be if we had 300 to 400 elements on the periodic table. Totally different world. We also, problems like destruction of nature would not exist, because the younger empires, as they got more scientific, they put humans at the center of creation. And in the ancient times, and you could just tell because the first religion is shamanism, the first spiritual science is shamanism. And in shamanism, humans are below rocks, plants, and animals. Humans are below those three. So in shamanism, because we understand this, there's a connection to nature that we don't have currently today. And I'm not talking about it from a spiritual point of view. I'm talking about it from the fact that the Homo sapien presently forgets that they're animals. Literally forgets. If you look at their religions, they actually forget that they're actually animals. And what ends up happening, because they forget that they're animals, is that they treat animals a certain way. They don't mind cutting trees. They don't mind poisoning the environment because they don't perceive that as themselves. And one of the first things the ancients understood, especially when you look at old school oral traditions in Africa. That's why I mentioned the Sangoma, because they're the ones who've spoken about the 23 races before man. Is that the 19 out of the 20 that I'm talking about are sort of more related in a sense to what we're calling animals, right? So meaning humans obviously are related to primates. We actually are primates. We're primates that evolved. But one thing the ancients knew is that you give any animal time, not any animal, but certain animals, for some reason, some animals don't evolve and some animals do. The shark and crocodiles, for the most part, are the same as they were 150 million years ago, 200 million years ago. The sharks, I think, are like 250 million years old. They're largely the same. Dolphins are much younger than sharks, and they evolve. So it's not all animals, but certain animals evolve. And we're primates, but you can literally say there's many other animals that could have potential. You give them enough time, you get them enough contact with certain type of energy, they will start to evolve too. So the 19 races that you're talking about out of the 23 are more related to that, in that sense, for the ancients. So because we're on the same chain as the animals, we would treat animals and plants a lot differently, a lot better. We would understand that we are animals. We're just higher versions of them. And not higher is better. Higher in terms of we evolved in the sense that now we can be caretakers to the other animals who can't care for themselves. So see, when people hear higher, and this is what happens when the cultural mind decodes ancient information. When a regular person hears higher, they think, oh, that means better. I said, no, higher just meaning you now have higher responsibility to the general chain, to the general ecosystem, to take care of it. So a lion is only going to be able to take care of lion business. An elephant is going to be able to take care of elephant business. A human being, if we function correctly, we're supposed to be able to take care of everybody. Because why? Because we're all part of the same system. That's the difference. So we would have a lot of the destruction that we're seeing in nature probably wouldn't be taking place the way it is now. I mean, there's people who don't care about climate change. There's people who kind of know it's happening and don't care because they care about profit right now. That wouldn't be like that. That's a trait that came in once the ancients, all that wisdom and that knowledge left or was lost. And though we have done an okay job of trying to recreate it, like for instance, yoga is spiritual alchemy, right? It's not alchemy, it's spiritual alchemy. So it's a part of alchemy that was recreated. It's a big difference. And in a sense, what ends up happening is that because we try to recreate certain things, we kind of understand certain things, but we don't. Others, we don't really have as good an understanding of them as we're supposed to have. So then what ends up happening is, okay, nature is not dying, but it's not functioning the way it's supposed to because we're actually harming it. And it's almost like we're part of a house and destroying the house that we're living in. So that will be different, obviously. But then even things that we talk about spiritually, like angels. People hear angels and say, well, that doesn't exist. Why? Because it's spooky. They should say it doesn't exist. I've never fought anyone for saying angels don't exist. But then, in the past, I've spoke about lunar religions and solar religions. And solar religions is when you take the 7 chakras that they understand from the East and you heal yourself and balance yourself in such a way that your body now has a surplus of energy and it begins to build additional chakras, the 8th being the most important one. Anybody who starts to do that, 8 and 9 and 10, that's the angel that we're talking about. Angels are just meaning the future humans that are doing what they're supposed to do and basically regaining what we lost to become those 4 super races before us. All 22 races above us at this point, right? But the 4 that never fell, right? A human that's starting to talk about 8 chakras, 9 chakras, 10 chakras is beginning that human is still more like the 19, but in theory, he or she is regaining what they lost. That's an angel. That being within function at a much higher level than the traditional Homo sapien who has 7 chakras. So it's interesting because concepts that people fight about. So people will say, oh, the concept of angels is not real. You're only saying that because that's coming from what you call angels is coming from the concept of, or the understanding of, basically. It's a concept that's come from the understanding of the younger races that came way after the ancients fell. And I say way after, meaning way younger than Egypt and Sumeria and India. That's where those cultures wouldn't even use that word angel. Way after them, because that word and that concept of a guy with wings or a woman with wings, it's coming from the much younger races. So then when a rational person hears angel, of course they're going to say it doesn't exist. That's the difference. So basically right now, where are we at? Well, we have 400 elements. We have between 300 to 400 elements. Basically, we have angels. I mean, basically saying that we would be much more connected to our environment. So when you add those three things up, the dreams that humans have, going to space, living a long time, curing all diseases and most diseases, that will be child's play to, if just those three things stood up. Basically, if you just said angels are here, which just means transform humans that are reaching their fullest potential. Periodic table, 300 to 400 elements. Total integration into nature. Everything I just described, space travel, living for a long time, we would have. Those are easy. But here's the thing, and this is what the biggest problem is. As a society, we're so material that we go into those things, right? We go into living long time. We go into space travel. We go into all these things, but we don't even look at, if I'm saying we're integrated with nature, we care more about the animals and plants and the ecosystem, we would actually care more about our fellow man as well. So things like poverty won't exist. Things like hunger won't exist. And somebody would say, well, how you... And then when you say that, it gets into political talk, because if somebody says poverty won't exist, like, see, when you take science fiction shows like Star Trek, right, which is a show that they try to see where would the future be like, what do I want the future to look like? And they erase poverty, they erase all that, they erase all those things. But the thing is, somebody will look at Star Trek and say that utopian future that they're talking about or that they're describing is socialist. Because there's no business. They don't use money. One of the things that has been lost is how everything has an energy to it. Everything has a structure to it, right? So if we say business is Mars, if we say martial arts is Mars, which is actually in between Mars and Venus, but let's just say we believe martial arts is purely Mars. Business is Mars. Healing is more lunar, right? Basically, every concepts also fit under a planetary energy, right? Which we say planetary energy, but we're supposed to probably just say mental energy. The planets itself are actually, the mental will come before the planet. The planets themselves are the biggest representation of that energy. But when you look at the Kabbalistic tree of life, and you see a Sephiroth over another Sephiroth, the Sephiroths are planets. So Yesod is the moon, Hod is Mercury. So when something, so let's say for instance, spirituality, as we know it, as people are practicing it right now, especially, is more the moon or lunar, right? If you have science that's more Hod, which is 8, lunar is 9, the moon is 9, the Mercury is 8. Science will supersede spirituality. Not saying it's better. It means if you put them together, science, spirituality is supposed to take almost direction from science. So you know how that's like even in the occult. The spirituality gets the information first, which is the subconscious mind. But the conscious mind is the one that decodes it and the one that organizes it in that sense. And because it organizes it and decodes it, what ends up happening is that it actually functions much better than when it's by itself. That's the difference. So when it's by itself, it's more chaotic. So for instance, people will say magic doesn't exist. A scientist would say magic doesn't exist. A Christian would say magic is the devil or evil, right? What ends up happening is that it's not even about what's the devil or not. Magic in itself, it's science in its purest form. So there's magic that exists today. That's not the magic I'm talking about. The magic that you're seeing today is magic without science. Magic without science is often corrupted. So that's why most of the time it's always associated with either things that doesn't work, or if it does work, it tends to be darker. Because real magic is science in its purest form. So when they say purest form, meaning you have to probably have science first. You have to purify yourself. And that's the yoga, that's the Kabbalah, which is psychology, purifying your mind first with the science, put them together, and then you get magic. So when they say, oh, science is 8, magic is, or spirituality is 9, it doesn't mean spirituality is lower. It means it just takes orders from it. So sometimes, for instance, the conscious mind can direct the subconscious mind, right? Often does. But the subconscious mind is older and more powerful. See, with our current understanding of how we like the current way we process information is flawed in the sense that we do everything based on power and size, and that's not always the necessary indication of who's actually stronger. Sometimes certain people could be stronger and you still take direction from the weaker person. It happens all the time. And in a sense, that's one thing that we're lacking. So realistically, we don't know how to put things together well. And so that's why you see so much scientists now, where you would see science broken into botany, to biology, to chemistry, and on and on and on, because our brains are more segregated now. And the thing is, because of the segregation mentally, it makes it hard to match how the ancients saw the world, because the ancients saw the world on a more unified level. That's a significant difference. So then somebody would say, so if the ancients never fell, poverty couldn't exist. Hunger couldn't exist. But not because of how some people who make science fiction, or some people who say they want a one world order and they want a socialist order, they would just look at it from, oh, well, let's get rid of, because if you get rid of business, you get rid of ingenuity. If you get rid of people creating things, what ends up happening is that invention is the key to pushing any civilization. So the difference is that the ancients understood economic systems as we have it have to be aligned with the ages. So a capitalist will come and say the founding fathers, even if they were Masons, they wanted capitalism, so capitalism has to be good. Not necessarily. If they wanted capitalism, it often is because in a system of the dark ages, when the earth is going through a dark age where people are more animalistic, people are less spiritual, you need capitalism because you can't put your trust in government, because government can be dark. So how do you check the government? You make everyone, and of course, this is just work in theory, it didn't work either, but you reward people based on what they can invent, based on their creativity. You reward people like that. But it's the dark ages. So what the people who push capitalism forget is that all because the founding fathers who Freemasons said, oh, they built America to be capitalism to kind of counteract evil Europe, socialism, right? That doesn't necessarily mean capitalism is more righteous than socialism. It just meant capitalism was better for that time because of the age that we're in. That's the difference. And little things like that can stop a lot of debates. But it wouldn't, because people see things mentally segregated and they can't put things together. So what I just described, a person will have to put together astrology, psychology, study history, study historical cycles to put such things together. And oftentimes people are not going to want to do all that work. So yes, people would talk about space travel, 300 to 400 elements. They would talk about, being fully integrated with nature and being able to do all kind of magic tricks because of that as great things. But for me, even poverty, end of hunger, end of even racism, because racially, everyone comes from Africa. And this is supposed to be something easy to understand, and we can't, because our ability to process information is distorted by our cultural lenses. And I say cultural because even racially, scientifically, there's only one race. Scientifically. You can get mad at that. You want to think your race is superior? And that goes to both sides. You can. Scientifically, there's one race. It's a fact. There's not enough genetic differences to qualify as a different race. It's not. So, racism, hunger, even discrimination against gender. One of the things the ancients knew a long time ago is that women have access to a type of knowledge that men can't access. Or they can, but they have to work to access it. Why? Because the ancients knew in a time before what people described of Atlantis, there was one gender. And it broke off into two tribes. One tribe that could give childbirth, and one tribe that couldn't. The tribe that could give childbirth became women, and the tribe that gave birth to children, because they have to inherit the burden of karma of the tribe, meaning they have to inherit the burden of karma. A man has a kid, he could just pick up and leave and say, I'm not going to take care of the kid anymore. It's much harder for a woman to do that. So because of that, nature gave them access to a type of information that the male either wouldn't have access to or would have to work at it. Or the male will probably have to be spiritually transformed, like the first four races, and be able to have incarnations under both genders. And if that was the case, and they kept their memory, then they would have access to that. So when a society understands that what their women have to go through and the burden that their women have to do, they would respect their woman more. And not only would they respect their woman more, they would almost nurture the woman's ability to tap into that type of wisdom, which is beyond the traditional knowledge that we're saying. And when they tap into that type of wisdom, it gives you access to a type of creativity that our imaginations currently can't even perceive. So people get into the space travel, being able to do all kind of magic tricks because you're one with nature now, basically having 300 to 400 elements, right? In a lot of ways, what would happen is those things are nice, but the things I describe later on are more things to me that are amazing. No hunger, no racism, no discrimination against gender, even discrimination against religion. All these religions are basically just different cultural ways of achieving the same path. And as somebody could hear that and still ignore it and kill someone because they're a different religion. But if the ancients never fell, we probably wouldn't be on that type of mindset. Probably wouldn't exist. So when I make this video, am I supposed to say you're supposed to feel bad because the ancients fell and now we have to make use of what we have? No. But it's to be aware as spiritual seekers that the spirituality that you're practicing is a reconstructed spirituality, and a lot of times still has the flaws of the cultures that gave birth to them. So be cautious, be less judgmental. Understand that you need science. Understand that when Neil deGrasse Tyson, always say his name backwards, makes statements like, there's no way the Egyptians can have more knowledge than us. Let the scientists be arrogant. Let the science or logical people think they don't need intuition. Spiritual seekers understand this. You need both. Let the other side be cocky and say they don't need meditation. They don't need this. They don't need that. A lot of times when spiritual people hear the other side talk, they become just as imbalanced as the scientists and the mathematicians. Don't do that. You need both. Oftentimes, and I'll be honest with you, you probably need more science than you need spirituality. Science right now is moving at a much faster rate than spirituality. The spirituality people have access to has not evolved from 2,000 years ago. Hasn't. Science is evolving much faster. So I actually think science is actually more important. So when you look at the state of the world, understand that we're all in it together, and we all are starting from at a certain point where we're putting together information. The thing is, not to make mistakes that you don't have to make. I don't think a scientist will ever be able to respect spirituality. Some do, as some of them I mentioned, like Einstein and Newton. But I think the majority of scientists can't. Just like I think when it comes to certain spiritual topics, certain spiritual things, especially if you're on an indigenous vibration, women or shamanesses are going to be instrumental because there's going to be certain things men are not going to be able to tap into as easily. And I'm not going to say there's things that women can't tap in, that I wouldn't say that. There's things that women might not be able to tap into as easily as men. But I think when men hear that, they think because that means women are not superior. And I'm not saying women are superior, actually. I'm not one of those people who think women are superior. But they look at it, oh, well, women got stuff they can't tap into. We have stuff they can't tap into. Yes and no. It's easy for women to tap into stuff men can't. The difference is women have a different burden. So when you have a certain burden, you don't have time to tap into certain things as much as men do. If you have to raise your children and you may not have time to wonder about the stars and make theories about the stars. You may not. That's the difference. So the thing is, when I make this video, it's to inspire you, really, I actually think science, psychology, those type of things have to be put to the forefront. But even when you get past that, it's to inspire you. I talk a lot about shamanism. Shamanism for me is one of the purest sciences. And shamanism, when I say shamanism, people just think Mongolia or Tibet. Central Asia. No. Animism in itself, whether it's spirit medicine, totemism, animism in itself, where the human integrates into nature, is one of the more purest sciences that somebody can study. And even though those sciences are based on more on lunar and bloodlines, you can still, in a sense, learn from them and help it guide you. I think because they're not as accessible, you would probably have to go from a more scientific beginning. But even if you study yoga and Kabbalah, which I'm not saying don't study yoga and Kabbalah, especially yoga, because Kabbalah doesn't have this problem as much as yoga does. If you're studying Eastern principles, just understand that it's recreated science. And understand, because it's recreated, it still inherited the flaws of their creators, where they put humans at the center of the universe. And once you do that, you no longer will bond with the ecosystem as much as you're supposed to. But then it creates other problems. If humans are the center of the universe, well then, is it my race the center? It creates that one ripple. that one speck creates a whole bunch of ripples. Because then it becomes, well, humans are the center, but my race is the center of all humans. And it just starts you going on a bad path. So when I heard his arrogance with the Egyptians could not know what we know now, spiritual seekers don't make the same mistake. So, Siris King, till next time, peace.